Living on 1% land, how the Marshall Islands sustains 40,000 people on Earth's most fragile territory. But here is what most people get completely wrong about this place. The Marshall Islands does not survive because of what the land provides. It survives because of what the water has already taken away. And I will show you why that distinction changes absolutely everything about how we understand not just island life, but American identity itself. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will see a nation that has turned its greatest vulnerability into its most powerful asset, and the way they did it will challenge everything you thought you knew about survival. If you have ever wondered what it is like to live on the edge of the world, to build a home where the ground literally runs out, then subscribe. And please, leave a comment below telling me what is the most remote place you have ever been or dreamed of visiting. I genuinely read every single one. The Marshall Islands consists of 29 coral atolls scattered across roughly 2 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. But here is the crucial part that reshapes the entire story. Only 1% of this territory is actual land. The remaining 99% is water. 40,000 people choose to call this place home, not because they are trapped, not because they lack opportunity elsewhere, but because they understand something that mainlanders, even most Americans, have never grasped. They have built their entire civilization not on the land, but in relationship with the water. The economy, the culture, the food systems, the social fabric, all of it flows from the ocean. Land is where you sleep. Water is where you live. Wait, this part is important. The Marshall Islands story cannot be fully understood without understanding the deeper mechanisms at work. How a nation adapts when geography seems impossible. How community survives under constant pressure. And what patterns of resilience the Marshallese have developed that we, on the mainland, have completely overlooked. That is exactly what our complete in-depth guide explores in detail. You will find it linked in the description and pinned in the comments. It walks you through the signals and systems that have kept this nation functioning for generations. To understand Majuro, the capital and home to more than half the nation's population, you must first understand that it is not really an island at all. It is something far more precarious. A chain of narrow islands connected by a single road. In some sections, this road is less than 150 meters wide. On one side lies the still lagoon, on the other, the open Pacific. Sit in a house anywhere along this strip, and you can hear both at once. The soft lapping of the lagoon, the distant roar of the ocean beyond. This fragility is not a problem to be solved. It is the fundamental reality that shapes every decision, every day, every relationship in this place. And yet, people do not flee. Instead, they adapt with a sophistication that most development experts have never fully documented. The coral atolls that form the Marshall Islands are geological anomalies. Millions of years ago, volcanic islands rose from the ocean floor. As tectonic forces slowly pushed those islands downward, coral polyps at the surface began their endless work, building, growing, multiplying. The volcanoes sank completely. The coral remained. Over eons, the coral rings solidified, the waves ground coral into sand, and eventually these microscopic fragments accumulated into the narrow ribbons of land where people now live. This process created islands with almost no soil, no freshwater aquifers, no mineral resources, no forests. The highest point in the entire nation is just 2 meters above sea level. There are no mountains to catch rain, no valleys to store water, no hillsides to protect against storm surge. By every conventional measure of habitability, the Marshall Islands should be empty. Instead, 40,000 people wake up each morning and figure out how to live here, and they do it by understanding the ocean in ways that most landlocked people cannot even imagine. The ocean provides everything. Fish, which are the primary source of protein for the entire nation. Coconuts, which grow abundantly on even the poorest soil. Traveling routes that connect the scattered islands in ways that land never could. Trade pathways that link the Marshall Islands to the wider Pacific and, by extension, to the rest of the world. The ocean is not separate from daily life. It is the infrastructure. It is the economy. It is the reason that 40,000 people can sustain themselves on a territory where less than 1% is solid ground. But here is where the story becomes even more complex. The Marshall Islands also exists within an entirely different context. It is a freely associated state with the United States. This relationship carries profound historical weight and present-day complexity that shapes every aspect of island life. The Marshallese have United States citizenship or citizenship rights. They can live and work freely in the United States, yet most choose to stay. The islands receive financial assistance from the U.S. government, aid that is essential for basic infrastructure, education, and health services. But this assistance comes with conditions, with history, with the weight of decades-old agreements made under circumstances most Marshallese did not choose. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States conducted 67 nuclear weapons tests on two of the Marshall Islands atolls, Bikini and Eniwetok. The tests displaced thousands of people. They left radioactive contamination that persists to this day. They created health problems, cancers, birth defects, thyroid disease, that have haunted Marshallese communities for generations. The nuclear testing is not some distant historical footnote. It shapes the present. It shapes trust. It shapes how Marshallese people relate to American identity itself. And yet, the Marshallese have built a nation anyway. They have built schools where children learn in English and Marshallese. They have built hospitals where doctors treat modern diseases alongside the lingering effects of historical exposure. They have built a government, a court system, a military structure, all while navigating a geography that most nations would consider unlivable. The economic reality is stark. The Marshall Islands has very limited exports. The traditional economy, fishing, copra production, some agriculture, cannot sustain the entire population. Most employment comes from government jobs. Many Marshallese work in the public sector, in education, in healthcare, in administration. Without this employment, the island economy would collapse. Without the U.S. aid framework, most of this employment would not exist. This creates a peculiar dependency that most Americans do not think about. When we talk about American territories and freely associated states, we often focus on the politics, the history, the geographic curiosity. We rarely focus on the lived experience of the people who wake up every day in these places and navigate the reality of being American while living thousands of miles from the mainland, in a place where American infrastructure, American job market, American consumer goods are all either absent or prohibitively expensive. A simple grocery item, a can of soda, a box of cereal, a package of imported rice, costs 2, 3, sometimes 4 times what it would cost in Honolulu or California. Food is imported. Almost everything is imported. Fuel is imported. Building materials are imported. The Marshallese buy American, use American currency, navigate American bureaucracy, yet they live in a place where basic American consumer goods are luxuries. This is the daily contradiction that shapes life on these islands. You are American. You are geographically and culturally isolated. You depend on imports for survival. You depend on government employment for income. You live on land that is sinking, in a nation that is literally disappearing beneath the rising Pacific. And the people here do not collapse under the weight of this contradiction. They navigate it with a grace and pragmatism that suggests they understand something essential about resilience that we, on the mainland, have forgotten. The oldest Marshallese stories speak of wayfinders, navigators who could traverse the open ocean without instruments, reading the stars, the swell of the water, the flight patterns of birds. They could navigate across hundreds of kilometers of empty ocean and find tiny islands invisible to the untrained eye. This was not luck. It was knowledge passed down through generations. It was a deep understanding of patterns, of systems, of reading the invisible structures that connected the scattered islands together. In modern Majuro, this wayfinding tradition has not disappeared. It has transformed. Today's wayfinders are different. Educators, entrepreneurs, government workers, parents, community leaders. They are navigating a different ocean. It's the ocean of globalization, of climate change, of economic dependence, of historical trauma. But the skill remains the same: reading the patterns, understanding the systems, finding the pathways forward even when the terrain seems impossible. This is what outsiders often miss when they visit the Marshall Islands. They see the fragility. They see the poverty by American standards. They see the isolation and the dependency. They do not see the sophisticated adaptation that has kept this nation alive through centuries of external pressure, through catastrophic historical events, through a geography that should have ensured emptiness. They do not see the strength. And strength, that is the story we are here to tell. Aerial view, island road, lagoon ocean, narrow strip. But what does that strength actually look like on the ground? What does it mean to wake up every morning on land that covers less than 200 square kilometers total, shared among 40,000 people, to build a life, raise a family, start a business, all while the sea presses in from both sides? Woman morning tea porch, peaceful dawn. The answer begins not with grand infrastructure or economic transformation, but with something far more intimate. How Marshallese families have learned to reimagine what home means when home is measured in meters, not miles. Family home interior, children drawings, modest dwelling. Take housing, for instance. In the Marshall Islands, most residential land belongs to families, passed down through matrilineal inheritance. A woman owns the land. Her children inherit it. This is not simply property law. It is the foundation of Marshallese identity and stability. Yet the physical act of building a house on coral sand, in a salt-soaked climate where materials must be imported, presents constant challenges. House construction, concrete foundation, roof installation. Most homes in Majuro are elevated on concrete stilts or pilings. This is not an aesthetic choice. It is survival. When storm surge arrives, and it arrives often, those pilings allow water to pass beneath the structure rather than destroy it. The ground floor of many houses remains open, a parking space, a storage area, a place to repair fishing nets. Concrete pilings, fishing nets, storage area. The materials themselves tell a story of adaptation and constraint. Corrugated metal for roofing. Concrete blocks for walls. Plywood and timber imported from Asia. Everything must be shipped. Everything costs money. And in the Marshall Islands, money is scarce. Metal roof, rainwater, rust weathered. Yet these houses stand. They endure. Generation after generation, Marshallese families maintain and repair and rebuild their homes using whatever resources they can access. You will not see marble countertops or hardwood floors. You will see resilience. Roof repair. Father-son, working together. Beyond housing lies another critical survival mechanism: food. The Marshall Islands imports approximately 90% of its food. This is a shocking statistic when you first hear it, but it reflects a harsh geographic reality. Coral sand cannot sustain traditional agriculture. The soil lacks nutrients. The salt spray kills most conventional crops. Zerial Majuro, dense buildings, no farmland. Yet Marshallese people have not simply accepted this dependency. In scattered locations across the islands, you will find small gardens where families cultivate what they can. Breadfruit trees, coconut palms, papaya, taro, and protected lagoon areas. These gardens produce perhaps 10 to 15% of local food consumption, but that percentage represents something irreplaceable: autonomy, tradition, and a refusal to be completely controlled by the global supply chain. Woman gardening, plants vegetables, hands soil. The ocean, however, remains the true pantry of the Marshall Islands. Fishing is not merely an economic activity. It is cultural practice, nutritional necessity, and spiritual connection all combined. Nearly 70% of the protein consumed by Marshallese families comes from fish and seafood. Reef fishing, deep ocean fishing, octopus hunting in the lagoon, these are skills taught from parent to child, passed down as carefully as any family name. Fishing canoe, casting net, lagoon water. The economics of fishing in the Marshall Islands, however, reveal another layer of complexity. The nation does not have large commercial fishing fleets. What exists instead is a mixture of small-scale artisanal fishing for local consumption and a system where international fishing companies pay the government for access rights to Marshallese waters. This generates government revenue, critical government revenue, while the actual day-to-day fishing that feeds families remains small-scale and traditional. Fishing boats harbor industrial vessels, commercial fishing. This creates a peculiar tension. The Marshall Islands sits atop one of the world's richest fishing grounds. Tuna, skipjack, big eye, species worth billions of dollars globally. Yet most Marshallese families do not participate in this wealth directly. Their government receives licensing fees from foreign companies. Those fees fund schools, hospitals, and salaries. But the direct benefit to individual fishing families remains limited. Fish market, fresh catch, morning vendor. Wait, I need you to understand something crucial here. The economic system holding the Marshall Islands together is far more fragile and complex than most people realize. If you want to understand exactly how island economies function, how they generate revenue, what mechanisms keep them stable or push them toward crisis, I have prepared a comprehensive guide that breaks down these systems in detail. You will find it linked in the description and pinned in the comments. This is not a quick summary. It is an in-depth resource that explains the keys to understanding island economic sustainability. Map charts, statistics data, economic diagram. The truth is that the Marshall Islands depends on four primary sources of revenue. First, fishing licenses sold to international companies, which generates approximately $120 to $150 million annually. Second, contributions from the United States government through the Compact of Free Association Agreement, roughly $150 to $200 million per year. Third, remittances sent home by Marshallese immigrants living in the United States and other countries. Fourth, tourism, though this remains minimal compared to other Pacific islands. Shipping containers, government office, beach tourism. Add these together and you might think the Marshall Islands has sufficient resources. But divide these amounts among 40,000 people, account for government administration, schools, healthcare, infrastructure maintenance, and the picture becomes stark. Per capita income hovers around $3,000 to $4,000 annually, well below the global average. Classroom students, school chalkboard, education. Yet schools operate, children attend, healthcare, though limited and often inadequate, exists. Roads are maintained. Because of this economic interdependence, the Marshall Islands remains forever tied to the decisions, policies, and whims of much larger powers. Hospital building, healthcare, nurse supplies. This brings us to perhaps the most defining relationship in modern Marshallese history, the Compact of Free Association with the United States. Signed in 1986, this agreement transformed the Marshall Islands from a trust territory under UN mandate into a sovereign nation, with a significant asterisk. Historical document signing, flag government building. Under the compact, the Marshall Islands is independent in most matters of governance. The nation has its own constitution, its own laws, its own government structure with a president and parliament. Citizens are Marshallese first. But, and this is the crucial caveat, the United States maintains responsibility for defense and foreign policy. More practically, the United States provides substantial financial aid, and in return, maintains military strategic advantages in the region. Military ships port, naval presence, government flag. The compact was supposed to be renegotiated in 2001. That negotiation never happened. Instead, both parties signed a financial supplement that extended the arrangement and provided additional payments. In 2023, as the compact neared its natural conclusion, negotiations for renewal became increasingly contentious. The Marshall Islands demanded significantly increased payments, resources necessary to address climate change, infrastructure needs, and economic development. Flooding, coastal erosion, rising water, climate damage. The United States offered increases, but far below what the Marshall Islands government considered necessary. The political dance continues. For now, the Marshall Islands survives in this ambiguous space, sovereign yet dependent, independent yet constrained. Meeting discussion, negotiation, government officials. This dependency has created generations of Marshallese who have made a different choice. Emigration. Today, more Marshallese people live outside the Marshall Islands than within it. They live in Guam, Hawaii, Arkansas, California, wherever opportunity exists or where they have family sponsorship. This diaspora sends remittances home, maintains cultural connections through visits and phone calls, and represents both a safety valve and a profound loss. Cultural festival, family video call, diaspora community. When you walk through Majuro, you encounter the impact of this diaspora immediately. Families are incomplete. Young people who might have stayed have left for education or employment. A generation has been scattered across the ocean, trying to find economic stability in places where being Marshallese is not normative, where cultural identity requires active maintenance, where the experience of displacement is constant. Quiet street, empty road, afternoon atmosphere. Yet paradoxically, this same diaspora sustains the Marshall Islands economically. Without remittances, the already fragile economy would collapse entirely. The money sent home by Marshallese working in the United States covers a portion of household expenses, allows for education of younger siblings, funds small business ventures, and provides the buffer that prevents absolute poverty for thousands of families. Money transfer, bank transaction, woman relief. This creates a cruel paradox. The nation's survival depends partly on the departure of its people. The more educated and capable leave to seek opportunity abroad. They become successful, or at least more economically stable, and send money home. But in doing so, they cannot contribute to local economic development in their home islands. The leadership they might have provided, the businesses they might have started, the cultural knowledge they might have transmitted to younger generations, all of this is lost to geography and economic necessity. Office work professional, video call laptop, international employee. How do Marshallese people navigate this impossible situation? How do they maintain identity, maintain connection, maintain hope when the system itself seems designed to scatter them? The answer lies not in government policy or economic theory, but in something far more human: community, culture, and an almost stubborn insistence on continuity. Community gathering, family meal, sunset gathering. In every Marshallese community, whether in Majuro, on outer islands, or in the diaspora, you will find the church. Christianity arrived in the Marshall Islands in the 19th century and transformed itself completely into Marshallese culture. Nearly all Marshallese are Christian. Sunday is not merely a day of worship, it is the central social, cultural, and community event of the week. Church congregation singing, worship service, colorful interior. Church provides structure, meaning, and community in a society that is otherwise fragmented by geography and economic pressure. It is where extended family gathers, where decisions are discussed, where resources are shared, where cultural traditions persist and adapt. In many ways, the church is the true government of Marshallese society, more influential than any parliament or minister. Choir singing, traditional dress, spiritual worship. Beyond church lies the broader fabric of Marshallese culture itself. Language, food, traditional navigation, storytelling, craft traditions. These elements persist despite a century of colonization, nuclear testing, economic restructuring, and cultural pressure. Young people learn Marshallese language at home, though English increasingly dominates education and commerce. Traditional skills are still taught, though often by elders conscious that younger generations may not value them. Weaving handscraft, traditional skills, elder teaching. Food represents another anchor of cultural identity. Pandanus, coconut, fish, sea cucumber, breadfruit. These are not merely sustenance. They are memory, connection, identity. A Marshallese person eating traditional food is not simply eating. They are affirming that they belong to a specific place, a specific history, a specific community. Food preparation, cooking traditional, hands kitchen, language, carries similar weight. The Marshallese language is Austronesian, related to languages spoken across the Pacific from Fiji to Hawaii to Indonesia. It reflects centuries of ocean voyaging, trade, cultural exchange, and adaptation. Each word carries history. To speak Marshallese is to participate in that history. Language class, student learning, classroom board. Yet English has become dominant in schools, government, and business. Young Marshallese are fluent in English, often more comfortable speaking it than their ancestral language. This is not unusual. It is happening in Pacific Islands everywhere. But it represents a subtle transformation. As language shifts, cultural knowledge embedded in that language begins to fade. Bilingual sign, young people talking, Market Street. This is where the stakes of island survival become deeply personal. It is not merely about economic policy or government stability. It is about whether a culture, a way of understanding the world, a way of being human, whether all of that can persist when the geographic, economic, and political systems that sustained it have been completely transformed. Old-new contrast, cultural blend, tradition-modern. The answer emerging across the Marshall Islands is not one of simple preservation or simple abandonment. It is synthesis. Young Marshallese people are not abandoning their identity. They are remaking it, adapting it, making it work in a globalized world. They are learning English without forgetting Marshallese. They are pursuing modern careers while maintaining cultural connections. They are navigating a complex space between past and future. Aerial Lagoon Island, narrow landwater, Majuro Harbor. This synthesis, however, does not happen by accident. It requires deliberate choices, difficult conversations, and institutions that actively work to keep culture alive while opening doors to the wider world. In Majuro, you can see this happening in real time. Walk through the central market in the early morning, and you will encounter something that looks like any other Pacific Island marketplace. Vendors calling out prices, families selecting fresh fish and produce. But listen more carefully, and you hear Marshallese being spoken fluently alongside English. Watch the transactions, and you see young entrepreneurs managing digital payment systems while their elders price coconuts the way they always have. Neither is giving way. Both are coexisting. Market fish fresh, vendor selling, morning market island. The Majuro Public Library, tucked away in a modest building near the center of town, has become an unexpected hub for this cultural negotiation. Inside, the shelves contain not only English-language books and computers with internet access, but also a growing collection of materials in Marshallese. Oral histories are being recorded and digitized. Young people come here not just to access information about the world beyond the islands, but to learn about their own history, genealogies, traditional navigation techniques, stories of their ancestors. A librarian named Liliana told me that the most popular request she receives is from teenagers asking to research their family lineages. They want to know who came before them, what their names mean, what responsibilities those names carry. In a world that constantly pulls them toward the future, they are deliberately looking backward to understand who they are. Library books, shelves, young students studying, genealogy research. This hunger for cultural knowledge is not unique to Majuro. Across the Marshall Islands, in communities on outer islands where access to modern services is far more limited, similar efforts are underway. On Arno Atoll, about 20 kilometers northeast of Majuro, a small school has begun teaching traditional navigation, the system by which Marshallese ancestors crossed thousands of kilometers of open ocean without instruments, reading stars, wave patterns, and the behavior of birds. The navigator Joseph Kabua, now in his 70s, has spent decades keeping this knowledge alive. He trains young people not by giving them textbooks, but by taking them out into the lagoon at night, showing them the stars, teaching them to feel the ocean's rhythm. When I asked him why this still mattered, why he invested so much time in teaching young people a navigation method that few of them would ever use practically, he paused for a long moment. Night sky stars, outrigger canoe ocean, traditional navigation. Because it is not really about getting from one place to another, he said. It is about knowing that you belong to this ocean, that you are part of something much larger than yourself. When you understand the stars and the waves the way your ancestors did, you understand that you are not lost, even when you are in the middle of nowhere. You know exactly where you are. The Marshall Islands are not nowhere. They are the center of the world, if you know how to read it. Old man hands ocean, elder wisdom tradition, face starlight. His words captured something essential about what is happening here. The Marshall Islands are often portrayed in international discourse as fragile, vulnerable, victim-like. And in material terms, that characterization contains truth. The rising seas are real. The economic dependence is real. The geographic isolation is real. But there is another truth that rarely makes it into the media narratives. The Marshallese people are not passive victims waiting to be rescued. They are agents of their own future, making active choices about what to preserve and what to transform. Mother-daughter braiding, fisherman nets, sunrise, community gathering. Before we continue, let me pause here, because this is where things get truly interesting. The question is not whether the Marshall Islands can survive in their current form. The question is what form survival will take, and who gets to decide. And to understand the forces at play, the economic pressures, the political leverage, and the cultural resistance, that is where things become genuinely complex. Our complete guide on island economies, cultural sovereignty, and the real mechanisms driving change in the Pacific territories goes deep into these patterns. You will find it linked in the description and pinned in the comment section. It is a resource that breaks down the decisions being made right now that will determine this place's future. If you want to understand not just what is happening here, but why, that guide is where those deeper keys are found. Government building official, community gathering elders, institutional tension. The youth of the Marshall Islands are at the center of this negotiation. In Majuro High School, a sprawling concrete complex that serves students from across the atoll, you will find young people navigating multiple worlds simultaneously. In the morning, they may sit in English class learning about Shakespeare or American history. By afternoon, they are in a Marshallese language class reinforcing vocabulary and grammar. After school, some work part-time jobs in the tourism sector or in government offices, practicing the skills that might lead to employment. Others participate in sports. Basketball and volleyball are intensely popular, or volunteer with community organizations. By evening, many return home to extended families, where Marshallese is the primary language, where traditional responsibilities and expectations still hold weight. High school students walking, classroom lesson learning, young people education. One student I spoke with, a 17-year-old named Kabuua, told me that he sometimes feels like he is living two separate lives. During school, I am thinking about college, about leaving the islands, about building a career somewhere else. At home, my parents and grandparents are talking about responsibility to family, about maintaining our connections to the land and the lineage. Both are important. I do not want to choose between them. I do not think I should have to. His comment reflects a broader reality. The Marshall Islands' young people are not experiencing cultural preservation or modernization as a binary choice. They are experiencing it as a constant negotiation, a daily balancing act. Teenage boy portrait thoughtful, young man school courtyard golden hour. This generation is also grappling with questions that previous generations could largely avoid. What does it mean to be Marshallese if you leave, if you migrate to the United States for education or work, as tens of thousands of Marshallese have done? Do you remain Marshallese? Can culture survive diaspora? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are lived realities. Majuro has a large population of Marshallese who were born elsewhere, who grew up in Hawaii or California or Arkansas, and who have returned. Their presence in the islands creates a constant flow of outside perspectives, outside possibilities, outside ways of being. Airport family reunion, emotional greeting embrace, people traveling. Some long-term residents see this returning diaspora as energizing, bringing new skills, new connections to global networks, new resources. Others worry that it is diluting local culture, that people who have spent most of their lives elsewhere cannot truly understand what it means to live here, to navigate the daily constraints and constraints of island life. The tension is real, but so is the pragmatism. Young Marshallese people understand that their islands are geographically remote but not culturally isolated. Information, goods, people, and influences flow in constantly. The question is not how to build walls against the outside world. That is both impossible and, many would argue, undesirable. The question is how to engage with that wider world while maintaining a core sense of identity and values. Video call, phone screen, social media feed, cultural dance performance. One afternoon, I sat with a group of teenagers in Majuro's Central Park, under the shade of coconut palms, watching the lagoon. They were speaking a rapid mix of Marshallese and English, code switching so naturally that the boundary between languages seemed irrelevant. When I asked them whether they thought the Marshall Islands would still exist as a distinct culture in 50 years, the answers varied. One girl said yes, but it would be different, woven together with global culture in ways we cannot yet imagine. A boy said it depended on whether the islands physically survived rising sea levels. Another said it did not matter where you lived. Culture was about who you were, not where you were, and that could be preserved anywhere. None of them seemed defeated or pessimistic. None of them spoke as though their culture was dying. They spoke as though it was evolving, and they were the ones doing the evolving. Teenagers talking shade, lagoon ocean view, young people sitting looming. This resilience is visible not only in individual attitudes but in the institutional choices being made. The Marshall Islands government, despite its limited resources, has made cultural preservation a stated priority. The National Museum in Majuro, housed in a simple but dignified building, contains a collection of artifacts, photographs, and oral histories documenting Marshallese civilization. More ambitiously, the government has begun implementing a national cultural heritage initiative aimed at cataloging and digitizing traditional knowledge before it is lost. At the Alele Museum, one of the few such institutions in the Pacific, archivists are working to preserve oral histories, genealogies, and traditional ecological knowledge. The work is painstaking and underfunded, but it is happening. Museum display artifacts, cultural preservation storage, historic photographs. What strikes you when you visit these spaces is not their grandeur. They are modest, even humble, but their intentionality. Every item preserved, every story recorded, every genealogy documented is a deliberate act of resistance against forgetting. In a world that moves fast, that constantly pushes toward the new, the Marshall Islands are saying, we will remember, we will hold on to what makes us ourselves, and we will do it on our own terms. Archive hands records, careful preservation, genealogy documentation. Yet even as these preservation efforts unfold, they are happening against a backdrop of profound uncertainty. The climate crisis is not abstract here. It is visible in seasonal patterns that are changing, in coral bleaching events that are becoming more frequent, in storm surge that is increasingly penetrating into communities that were once far enough inland to feel safe. An elder named Jania, who has lived her entire life on Majuro, told me that the tides are different than they were when she was young. The water comes higher now. The moon and the sun used to determine the tides, and we understood them. Now something else is happening. The ocean is rising, and we do not know when it will stop. Her observation is backed by scientific data. The Marshall Islands are experiencing some of the fastest rates of sea level rise in the world, with some projections suggesting that the highest points of the islands could be submerged within a century. Coastal erosion waves, shoreline collapse, rising sea level. This reality frames everything else that happens on these islands. No discussion of culture, economy, or politics can escape it. The Marshall Islands are literally running out of time and space. And yet, the people here are not paralyzed by this fact. They are planning, adapting, fighting. Some of those fights are political, at the international level, demanding that wealthy nations take responsibility for their carbon emissions and the rising seas they have caused. Other fights are intensely local, communities organizing to relocate away from the most threatened areas, to reinforce vulnerable coastlines, to invest in water and food security, even as the land beneath them shifts and sinks. Government meeting climate change, presentation data maps, community planning. The synthesis happening in the Marshall Islands is therefore not occurring in some peaceful realm of cultural exchange and artistic expression. It is occurring in a place under genuine threat, where every choice about what to preserve and what to adapt carries weight. Young people learning traditional navigation are not doing so as tourists or as academics. They are preparing themselves for a world in which the ocean may become even more central to survival. Teenagers coding switching between Marshallese and English are not performing multiculturalism for an audience. They are simply living in the reality of their moment, rooted in a specific place and culture, but unable to exist in isolation from global forces and global systems. Coastal cleanup community, seawall reinforcement, water collection system. This is what makes the Marshall Islands so important to understand, not just as a documentary subject or a geographic curiosity, but as a window into what human adaptation and cultural continuity actually look like when real stakes are involved. It is easy to talk about preserving culture when that culture is not under existential threat. It is far more revealing to watch people choose what to hold on to, what to let go of, and what to transform when the cost of those choices is their own survival and the survival of their children. Aerial atoll sunset, lagoon, golden light, island landscape. Living on 1% land is not just a geographic constraint. It is a complete reimagining of what it means to belong to a place, to have identity, and to build a future when that future is not guaranteed. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. The Marshall Islands are not struggling because they are weak or unprepared. They are enduring because they have already accepted something that most of us spend our entire lives avoiding. Hands weaving pandanus, traditional craft, elderly woman. They have accepted that survival is not about controlling the future. It is about being present enough, connected enough, and rooted enough to respond to whatever comes. Every conversation I documented there, every family meal I observed, every boat that left the lagoon at dawn, all of it was underpinned by this quiet understanding. You cannot plan your way out of rising seas. You cannot negotiate with a typhoon. You cannot vote away the reality of a 1% land base in an ocean that is warming and expanding. What you can do is know your neighbors so deeply that when crisis comes, you know exactly who to turn to. What you can do is understand the ocean not as enemy or commodity, but as kin, something with rhythms and moods that you have learned to read across generations. Children beach playing, boat repair wooden, women braiding fiber. This is what makes the Marshall Islands relevant not just to Pacific studies or climate policy, but to anyone living in the modern world who senses that the old certainties are crumbling. Mainlanders often pity the Marshall Islands. They see isolation, vulnerability, limited opportunity. But what they are really looking at is clarity. The Marshallese did not have the luxury of pretending that community was optional, that culture was a hobby, or that the place they lived was interchangeable with somewhere else. They built their entire lives around the premise that these things matter absolutely. And now, as the world grows warmer and more unstable, as supply chains fracture and certainty evaporates everywhere, that premise does not look quaint or backward anymore. It looks like wisdom. Man's seawall ocean, sunset silhouette, contemplative stance. The Marshall Islands sustains 40,000 people on 1% of its territory because those 40,000 people have never forgotten that they sustain each other first. The land is fragile, yes. The future is uncertain, yes. But the bonds between people, refined and tested across centuries of living in one of the harshest environments on Earth, are unbreakable. This is not a story about victims or about noble savages enduring against impossible odds. It is a story about people who know exactly what they have and exactly why it matters. They have built a society, imperfect, modern, struggling, beautiful, on the foundation that everything depends on everything else, and that you cannot take any of it for granted. Streetlights, dusk, homes, twilight, island settlement. When we talk about island life, when we talk about remote territories, when we talk about places the mainland has forgotten, we are often talking about places that have had to learn something crucial that the rest of us are only beginning to understand. How to live as if everything is connected, because it is. How to think in terms of 7 generations, not 7 quarters. How to know that survival is not an individual achievement, but a collective responsibility. The Marshall Islands shows us what that looks like in practice, not as theory, not as aspiration, but as daily life, woven into every decision, every meal, every conversation. Aerial atoll view, fishing boat lagoon, island settlement. The lesson of the Marshall Islands is not that we should all move to atolls or abandon modernity or retreat into tradition. The lesson is far simpler and far more urgent. Pay attention to the people who have never had the luxury of forgetting what truly matters. Learn from the places that have survived by knowing, deeply and completely, that they are part of something larger than themselves. The Marshall Islands will teach you that 1% of land can sustain a nation if that nation understands that land as sacred, as shared, as something you inherit from your ancestors and hold in trust for your grandchildren. Marshall Islands flag, ocean wind, national symbol. Here is what I want to leave you with. Take a moment this week to notice something in your own life that you have been taking for granted. A place, a person, a practice, a piece of land near you that you move through without really seeing it. Then, do one small thing to deepen your connection to it. Learn its history. Spend time there intentionally. Talk to someone who has lived there longer than you have. Because what the Marshall Islands teaches us is that the places that will matter most when everything else changes are the ones we have never stopped paying attention to. Child hand water, elder smiling, sunrise ocean. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into life on Earth's most fragile territory. If this story of resilience, isolation, and cultural continuity in the Marshall Islands moved you, please hit subscribe so you never miss another exploration of the people and places most of the world has forgotten. Drop a comment below. What has your own connection to place taught you about what really matters? And please, activate that notification bell so when we venture to the next overlooked island territory, you will be the first to know. We have so many more shores to explore together.